One health question as we start. What you went through, has that affected you emotionally in any way, do you think?
As somebody who has had great endurance, as a kid I was a long distance runner. Thank God I've been, healthy as a horse. It was a little bit shocking to me when the doctor there told me, hey, you're having a heart attack.
So you identify as a democratic socialist. You got the endorsement of Representative Ocasio-Cortez over the weekend, another prominent democratic socialist. When you talk about a value and political and economic change in the country, how far do you think you can take the United States of America toward democratic socialism?
Well, it depends, what we mean by democratic socialism. What I am trying to do in many ways is pick up where Franklin Delano Roosevelt left off. Mm-hmm. And you may recall in a not widely publicized State of the Union speech he gave in 1944. Mm-hmm. It's a year before he died, toward the end of the Second World War. This is what he said in so many words. He said, you know what? We have political rights. You have freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, all of that's great. But what we don't have are guaranteed economic rights. Mm-hmm. So you can vote, but you also have the privilege of sleeping out on the street. You can protest, which is good, but you also have the freedom to work 60 or 70 hours a week at starvation wages. You have the freedom not to have health insurance, not to be able to send your kids to college. What I'm trying to do in this campaign is pick up where Roosevelt left off and say that economic rights must be considered as human rights.
Do you also embrace the part of FDR that said in 1936 when he was running for re-election that his adversaries, economic and otherwise, hate me and I welcome their hatred?
Absolutely, I do. I mean, you can judge a person by the friends they have. You can judge a candidate for president by the enemies they have. And I uniquely, in all due respect to my colleagues, I am taking on the insurance companies, the drug companies, the fossil fuel industry, the military industrial complex, the prison industrial complex, Wall Street, the Democratic establishment. There was a guy who was head of Third Way. That's the corporate wing of the Democratic Party. And he said, Bernie Sanders is an existential threat to the Democratic Party. I agree with him, I am. I want to convert the Democratic Party to break its dependency on big money and corporate interests, like Third Way, and make it into a party of working class people, of young people, of all people who believe in justice.
One of the big things the president has is the appointment power, apart from legislation you can get done. Would it be your intention to appoint Democratic socialists to big positions in your administration?
You're going a little bit too crazy on the word here. I will appoint people who believe in the working class and the working families of this country, who are prepared to stand up to the incredibly powerful corporate interests that today dominate our economic and political life. Mm-hmm. I will appoint an attorney general who, for the first time in modern history, will go after white-collar crime, which I believe is rampant. Instead of arresting kids who are selling marijuana, maybe we go after some of the crooks on Wall Street and in other major industries. I will appoint an attorney general who is prepared to enforce the antitrust laws that are on the books that have been neglected for so very long. Yep. So when I talk about democratic socialism, you want to talk about, what does it mean? Let's be clear, what does it mean? Let's not get people overly nervous about it. What it means is that healthcare is a human right. Not a very radical idea. We are the only major country on earth that does not allow that reality to take place. That's what I believe in.
Let me take one more crack at the word. I was looking at the DSA website the other day, and they said we can't eliminate private corporations in the short term, so we have to confront them. Would it be your intention or your goal in the medium or long term not to have private corporations?
No, that's not my intention.
Okay.
What is my intention, though, is to make sure that workers have representation on those large corporations. So we have presented recently the Corporate Accountability Act,
Right.
which says, again, not terribly radical. It exists in one form or another in other countries, including Germany. Right. So we say that instead of just being a cog in a machine, you know, you're a worker, you're coming to work, you're working for your paycheck, what about giving that worker some power and responsibility in terms of the shaping of that corporation? Should Wall Street and a handful of members of a board determine whether a factory remains in the United States or whether it goes to China? Should a handful of wealthy board members determine whether or not there is a stock buyback or whether workers get decent wage increases and decent benefits?
Does this mean you're not impressed by the statement that Jamie Dimon and the Business Roundtable put out saying that we are going to take considerations broader than just profit into our practice? You don't think they're serious?
No, of course not.
If you require that 45% of the board be workers, if you require more distribution required distribution of profits to workers, if you ban stock buybacks, do you accept that that would have a slowing effect on economic growth?
It's not good enough just to look at economic growth. That has been kind of the biblical stature that corporate America has been looking at. We have growth, we have growth. But as I mentioned to you earlier, in the last 45 years, despite unbelievable growth, in real inflation accounted for dollars, the average worker is no better off than he or she was 45 years ago. In the last 30 years, the top 1% have seen a $21 trillion increase in their wealth. Bottom half of America has seen a decline in their wealth. Half the people today are living paycheck to paycheck.
No, growth is the wrong measurement.
Of course it's the wrong one. What the question is our economy working for the people here? Is it working for ordinary Americans? That's the criteria. Do people feel secure? Do they know that their kids, everything being equal, are going to have a better standard of living than they do?
How do you factor in the significance of the fact that modern global capitalism has substantially reduced poverty in other parts of the world?
But when you talk about the global economy, you're right. Thank God. The terrible, terrible poverty that has been seen in the developing world, some of that is receding. That's great. On the other hand, you are looking at an unbelievably and grotesque level of global income and wealth inequality. And you're also seeing not only massive income and wealth inequality, but in many countries, a movement toward increased authoritarianism and away from human rights and democracy.
Let me ask a question about real world governance rather than campaign rhetoric. Joe Biden has said at a fundraiser earlier this year, nothing really fundamental has to change. You have proposed enormous changes. What I wonder is, would the practical results of a Biden administration really be that different from the practical results of a Sanders administration, given the fact that there are so many constraints on things getting done in Congress?
John, you're forgetting one very important thing, and that I am a different type of politician, and my administration will be certainly unique in modern American history, at least going back to FDR. Talk about the fact that nothing much really big ever happens, and there's truth to that. But what you're missing is that right now you have a Congress and a White House that are dominated by a corporate elite who have unbelievable amounts of money and influence over the political and economic life of this country. I'm not going to be dominated by those guys. I will take them on and I will beat them. Real change in this country has never taken place without millions of people standing up and demanding that change. That is the history of the labor movement, the history of the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay movement, the environmental movement. And as President of the United States, and I've said this before, I will not only be Commander-in-Chief of the military, I will be Organizer-in-Chief. And when you do that, John, then you're not talking about incremental changes.
But even if you have a successful election and you get elected, even if it's successful to the point that Democrats win a small majority in the Senate, Is Joe Manchin going to vote for your program? Is John Tester going to vote
Damn
for your
right
program?
they will. You know why? And they're friends of mine.
Yeah.
Because we're going to go to West Virginia, which is maybe the poorest state, well, one of the poorest states in this country. Look, what happens right now, your average politician sits around and he or she thinks, they say, let's see, if I do this, I'm going to have the big money interest putting 30-second ads against me. So I better not do it. But now they're going to have to think, if I don't support an agenda that works for working people, I'm going to have President Sanders come into my state and rallying working class people. You know what? At the end of the day, the 1% is very powerful. No denying that. Mm-hmm. The 99%, when they're organized and prepared to stand up and fight, they are far more powerful.
But if there were a latent political revolution waiting to happen, you've been running for president for 5 years. Wouldn't we see more of it by now than we've seen?
Hey, John. All right, let's talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the ideas that I introduced 4 years ago. I'm not taking credit for all the changes. Millions of people. 4 years ago, $15 an hour minimum wage, radical and crazy. 4 years ago, Medicare for all. Healthcare is a human right. Bernie, that's un-American. 71% of Democrats in the last poll now support that. Public colleges and universities all over the country. Climate change is a major threat. You know, Democrats disagree about it. I have
but
the
that's
most...
more people talking about it. That's not stuff having gotten through the process.
Well, how's it going to get through the process when Donald Trump is president, who's beholden to his billionaire friends, and when Mitch McConnell runs the Senate? But the House of Representatives did pass a $15 an hour minimum wage. The House of Representatives did pass significant election reform, et cetera, et cetera. So it's waiting. All I'm saying here, John, is the ideas that I am talking about are by and large supported by the American people. I think that as president, I help bring our country together by talking about issues that Republicans agree on. Republicans think that we should not have a trade policy which sends good-paying jobs to China and Mexico. I agree with that. So I think we can bring people together around an agenda that works for working families, not just the 1%.
Congress has not been able to raise the gas tax by pennies to fix crumbling roads and bridges. You've got a wealth tax, which is enormous. Congress has not been able to pass card check unionization. You're proposing a huge increase in the clout of organized labor. How are those things even conceivable in
All right, John,
2019?
Okay. What I want you to, it's a good question, it's a fair question, but you're looking at status quo politics. I often use a statement that Nelson Mandela made. This is what he said. It always seems impossible until it is done, okay? And that these ideas, oh my God, it can't be done. Imagine everybody in America having health care. Duh. That's what exists in every other country on earth. Why is that so impossible? Imagine the United States leading the world in transforming our energy system and saving the planet for our kids and grandchildren. Oh my God, it's impossible. Really? What's the alternative? So here's what you're not seeing. You're right in saying that these are big ideas. I can see that. You're right in saying that we have more or less a dysfunctional Congress. I agree with you. But where you're not right is understanding that if you and I were sitting here, just as one tiny example, you and I are sitting here 25 years ago, and I said to you, you know, John, I think that gay marriage was legal in every state in this country. What would you have said to me? You'd have said you're crazy.
Yes, I would.
So would I, okay? If, going way back, when I grew up at a time when African Americans could not vote, right? Kids could not go to local school, could not drink at a water fountain, and change took place. You know, Martin Luther King Jr., others, they stood up and they fought. 100 years ago, women did not have the right to vote because, as we all know, women's place is in the house. They're supposed to have babies. They're not supposed to vote. 100 years ago, not a long time. Change can take place when you motivate people, when you get people organized, when they stand up for justice. That's what I believe.
If you've got one shot in your first year, and the history...
Wrong question. I know where you're going.
Okay.
You're going to ask me to be prioritize.
Yes.
No. Once you get moving, you can move. I think that the American people can chew bubblegum and walk at the same time. We must save the planet. That's not an option. So climate change we've got to combat climate change. America's got to lead the world. I will demand that every American has health care as a human right. I will not allow hundreds of thousands of bright young kids not to be able to go to college because they lack the income, or 45 million people to be suffering with large student debt.
You don't accept that you've got to pick one first
that's
target.
That's old thinking.
When we did this interview 4 years ago, you ended it by saying, John, don't underestimate me.
Did I say that, John?
You did.
And you underestimated me.
And I confess that I did. But right now, I think a whole lot of people are discounting your chances, or in your view, maybe underestimating you. What would you say to them?
Well, again, when I became mayor of the city of Burlington way back when, in 1981, actually a guy, I think a local reporter said, well, the odds of Sanders winning against a 5-term incumbent, running as an independent, the odds are about 100 to 1. I won, okay? The odds of winning in last time around, taking on the entire Democratic establishment, we ended up winning 22 states and got more young people votes than Trump and Clinton combined, right? The ideas that I talked about 4 years ago seemed so radical and extreme. Today, they're kind of mainstream ideas, right? Don't underestimate me.
Senator, thanks so much. Appreciate it.